Hey, good evening, everybody. We have got Paul Golding on the channel, and a huge shout out to Liam Tufts. I was absolutely mesmerized watching Paul's story, his journey through what he did. Ends up with over 2 million followers on Facebook, and they shut him down. And the enemy of my enemy is my friend. I just had a strike on Facebook. We're completely shadow banned over there. Zuckerberg's a complete sellout. And, there was some real moments where Paul is campaigning against some absolute monsters. One is a guy who's telling his congregation that it's okay to snatch white girls and have them as sex slaves. And, Paul's outing these people at considerable risk to his life. So he's banned from everywhere. He's only on X these days. The link to his X is in the description box below this video. If you want to go over there, if you want to support and contact his and help him with his work, anything, ask questions, whatever. And thanks for coming on, man. And if we could just go back then, like, what was it like for you when you were growing up?
Well, thank you for having me on, Sean. I grew up in southeast London in a relatively rough council estate on the outskirts. I grew up born and bred in a town called Erith. And when I was growing up, it was the area that I lived in was pretty much, 100% English. And we grew up playing manhunt and football and curbsy and all these things. It was a few years later that the area started to go into a steep decline. When I go back to the area now, it's completely unrecognizable. I just don't recognize it in any way, shape, or form. It's full of crime. It's a rough area in southeast London. I've been stabbed twice myself. My brother's been stabbed. So we had a non-Etonian upbringing. So we're Britain first. We're not your average politicians. We are very much working class, which I think completely separates us from the rest. Is whether you got the Socialist Labour Party or the Tories, they are upper middle class, silver spoon, polished politicians. Whereas Britain First, we are a working class party, uncompromisingly patriotic, and we love this country. We want to put our own people first. We want to build a paradise for our children in the future. Just like, a land fit for heroes we were promised after 2 world wars. It never materialised, but I've been fighting for that land fit for heroes for over 25 years now. I first got involved in nationalist politics at the age of, I think it was 16 or 17. I'll have to try and work that out. But it was 16 or 17. I was just fresh out of secondary school and I got involved in nationalist politics. I was very much triggered by a party election broadcast that I watched from I think it was the 1997 general election. And that began a kind of chain reaction that led me further and deeper into politics and until I got right up there on the front line and ended up, dedicating my life to this struggle.
Well, that's a good summary. So let's just go back then. Like, I grew up in Widnes, chemical manufacturing town in the northwest. And I'm 56 now. How old are you, Paul?
43.
43. So
yeah,
different generation, but quite close to me. And the country was a lot different back then, isn't it? I've just moved away from London. We've had a baby, moved away from London. It was the crime and stuff was getting out of control near where we were, and I completely understand where you're coming from. So, as a young person, then, what did you want to be when you were growing up? What were you like in school?
I was actually, I didn't really apply myself in school like a lot of working class people. We're just not interested, and I didn't really apply myself. Didn't get GCSEs. I was hopping the wag all the time. I was mainly down the snooker hall and out there, bunking off school, and I just didn't really. It wasn't interested at all. Everything that I've learned, any kind of knowledge or historical research, anything like that, any kind of knowledge that I have, it's all been self-taught, 100%. I never applied myself in education whatsoever. And I didn't really have any clear direction in my life until I left secondary school and then started getting involved in politics. And I just it's hard. People like to identify one single event that kind of, press that button and changed a person, put them on this direction in life. But I've never been able to identify anything singular like that. It was more just a gradual drift. I just kind of drifted into politics, drifted into learning about the issues affecting this country. And I just became completely absorbed in the whole thing. And here, 25 years later, I've been around the block a few times, had quite a rough ride.
So what did you do when you left school then?
When I left school, I was kind of, a lot of people I've seen, a lot of kids actually go through this. They kind of just do nothing for maybe 6 months to a year. They don't really know what to do. It's a bit of a shock leaving school, becoming an adult. So I didn't really do much. But what I did do is I started to really engross myself in history and politics. And at the age of, I think it was 1999, I joined the old British National Party at a time when it was transitioning from what people are familiar with, that old kind of, National Front type British National Party, the old BNP, into something more modern, mainstream and professional. And I wouldn't have really got involved unless they were going down that path. So I got involved at a time when Nick Griffin was fighting to take over the leadership of the old British National Party. And he was basically saying, we need to modernise, we need to copy what they're doing in Europe. We need to become more mainstream and fight local elections and build ourselves up. And that was really successful because, as you know, the old British National Party got over 50, I think it's 55 elected local councillors. They got 2 seats in the European Parliament, 1 seat on the London Assembly, and no other party that isn't promoted by the mainstream, like UKIP or Reform, has been able to match that level of success in terms of politics. So yeah, I got really involved in that, threw my heart and soul into it. In 2009, I was elected as the South East's first BNP councillor in Swanley, on the outskirts of London. And we won we came from nowhere, first time effort. We won in a landslide, 41% of the vote. Labour and Tory and everyone else were completely shocked that we'd managed to break through. A year later, this was at a time when the BNP was winning seats in the European Parliament, seats on the Greater London Assembly, councillors literally everywhere. And about a year later, the party started to disintegrate. It all started to go downhill. People were resigning. So many different reasons. I mean, it would take a show, an entire podcast to go through the reasons of what was happening. But the whole thing started to fall apart. And in 2011, we decided that we were going to launch Britain First, because we thought that there was a massive vacuum in British politics back then with the demise of the BNP. And, people say, oh, you used to be in the BNP and it doesn't look good. Well, to be honest, if you go back to that era, if you wanted to oppose all the problems we have in this country, whether it's mass immigration, illegal immigration, radical Islam, all this woke extremism, all that kind of stuff, if you wanted to really oppose that, there wasn't any other option apart from the old British National Party. Because there were, UKIP only really started to take off after 2010, 2011. And then, of course, we had Reform in the modern era. But if you go back, there was nothing else. It's a choice between the BNP and then there was a great big leap all the way to the Tories, which obviously was a non-starter. So, yeah, the BNP started to fall apart and we decided to launch Britain First with 2 imperatives at that point. The main one was we weren't going to repeat the mistakes that the BNP made, which was tolerating. We all know that there was a lot of bad apples in the BNP. They've got a toxic reputation. We know that. And the reason that was primarily is because it was tolerated. If you got caught saying stupid things or doing stupid things, you were given a slap on the wrist. There wasn't really a determined effort to try and root it out and try and become, non-extremist and mainstream to try and make headway. So we wanted to avoid the same mistakes in terms of tolerating, hardcore racism and so on, that gave the BNP such a toxic reputation. The other thing we wanted to do, and this was at the height of the old English Defence League, we wanted to avoid the kind of drunken hooliganism on the streets that they were displaying. So we wanted to avoid the mistakes that the BNP and the EDL were making. So we said Britain First is going to be ultra patriotic, but also very disciplined, very professional, and sooner or later we thought that would work. You know, after a lot of hard work. The first 3 years of Britain First were a real struggle. You know, we had no funds. We were living in poverty. We had no support base, no following, no donors, no members. It was really difficult. And then everything changed in 2013 because, of course, where I was born and bred in Erith, just up the road is the town of Woolwich. And, of course, in 2013, Fusilier Lee Rigby was slaughtered by the two Islamist terrorists up there. So I actually went to Woolwich the next day and I saw all the police cordons and everything. They were still doing forensics and so on.
Paul, because we've got a lot of American viewers, and I know a lot of the UK viewers understand the Lee Rigby story very well, how harrowing it was. Are you okay to explain it a bit more for the American viewers?
Yes, of course. Yes, no problem.
Thanks.
So in May 2013, a British soldier was making his way from a train station in Woolwich to his barracks, which were about a mile away. And on the way, he was attacked. He was rammed and then beheaded by two kind of ISIS terrorists. And it was a gigantic event in Britain. You know, the whole nation was in uproar. Everyone was disgusted. Everyone was angry that a British soldier could be butchered on the streets by these two Islamic terrorists. So, you know, that was a huge event in British political history. And like I said, I went up there the next day and they were still doing forensics. But I thought to myself then, something's got to be done about this, because at that point on the timeline, these Islamic extremists were running amok all over London, all over Birmingham, all over Luton. The whole country had a massive problem with Islamic extremists on the streets of this country, spewing hatred, spewing calls for violence. And the authorities were just allowing it to happen because they were terrified of being called racist. Just like the Grooming gang scandal, the authorities were terrified of being called racist. So nothing was done about it. And then, of course, our patience kind of snapped when a British soldier was beheaded on the streets of London. And no one else really did anything about it, but it was Britain First. It was myself and a few others said, that's it. The gloves are off. We're going to take the war to these people because this could happen again. And there was terror attack after terror attack. We've had so many terror attacks in this country. But in early 2014, I got together with about 20 activists in Kent, and we decided to launch something that we called Operation Fight Back. And what we thought we'd do was kind of copy some of what the Ulster Loyalists were doing, which was not becoming, I'm not saying we were like paramilitary, but we kind of copied their bravery, their approach to, you know, dealing with a problem head on. Because of what happened to Lee Rigby, we were determined to suffocate the activities and the activities and the demonstrations and the protests, everything that these Islamists were doing to recruit and to create an atmosphere of hatred against Western people. We were going to confront them head on. And we basically, it was no holds barred. We didn't hold back. We just went straight in there, all guns blazing. So we found out where they lived. We found out where they worked. We stalked their social media profiles. We would basically, you know, harass them 24/7. We made their lives miserable. For example, it was shortly after we launched this that we found out where Anjem Choudhury lives. Now, everyone knows Anjem Choudhury. He's the chief spokesman of Islamic terrorists in Britain. He has been connected personally to, I think, about 90 terror plots in this country. He was the one who radicalized the killers of Lee Rigby. So we thought we'd go after him, you know, immediately, straight away. We found out where he lived. I put surveillance units on his house for 3 days, and it was finally confirmed that he lived at this address in East London. We turned up at his house with like 20 activists, all 20 of us, turned up at his front door. And just as luck would have it, he was just turning in to the road where he lived as we were there. And I lost control of all the activists, and they just chased his car up the road. They was hanging off his bonnet, and we gave him a real scare. The very next day, later that evening, I had credible death threats from a group called Islamic Emergency Defense, who said that if I go back to, if I harass Anjem Choudhury anymore, then I was going to suffer the consequences. So the very next day, I took the same team back to his front door and did a Facebook Live on his doorstep and said, okay, we're here. Where are you? They never turned up. So we went into the heart of Muslim East London, Brick Lane, just where East London Mosque is. And we've done another one. We said, where are you? We're here. All these threats, let's see what you've got. And they didn't turn up. But then the Metropolitan Police intervened and arrested me, gave me bail conditions that I couldn't enter Greater London, the boundary of Greater London, even though that's where I was born and bred. I was banned from the whole of London just so I wouldn't be able to target these Islamists anymore. And it was just time after time after time. We were harassing terrorists, known hate preachers, all the people that were threatening the British people, the ones that were connected to Islamic terror plots. We were confronting them. We were harassing them. We made their lives a misery, because in the back of our minds, we had Lee Rigby. We had what happened to Lee Rigby was spurring us on. We've got to stop this happening again. So we have to keep up the pressure. And at the same time, every single activity we did, whether it was an ambush or a confrontation, we were uploading to Facebook, and the British people were lapping this up. In them, every video we put up was getting millions of views. It was going viral because the British people were fed up of watching these crowds of Islamists saying UK go to hell and all this kind of stuff, terror plots, terror attacks, and so on. And we were powerless. Everyone felt like we were powerless to deal with this. And there's this group of British men, throwing caution to the wind and just harassing these people and chasing them off. So that's how we built initially a huge Facebook following, and it grew to the height of it. It was 2.2 million until it was closed. Yeah, 2.2 million. But it's not just that. It was the reach, the organic reach on a weekly basis was anywhere between 10 and 25 million UK individuals every week. So we at one point, we calculated we were reaching more people organically than the BBC by far. That's how much power that kind of reach, which also gives you influence and power, and that's how much we accumulated. But I'll give another example. We heard on social media, we came across some posts that said that Anjem Choudhury and his gaggle were going to be outside the Indian embassy on the Strand in central London. They were protesting against the Hindus persecuting the Muslims in India. So, of course, we went there. And one of Anjem Choudhury's henchmen, we ambushed him and chased him across the road while the police were furiously holding us back. But also I walked down the road and found another one of them. It was only a young guy. He was about 18 years old, but he'd been radicalized by Anjem Choudhury. And he was, a complete ISIS fanatic at 18. But I was confronting him, trying to tell him the errors of his ways. A few weeks later, he was arrested by the police on his way to behead a British soldier. So these were the type of people that we were confronting, harassing and hunting down. And this is what really made Britain First a household name. This is what put us on the map. The fact that we were taking the fight to these Islamic extremists when the police just wouldn't touch them because they were terrified of being called racist.
And is it around this time that you outed the imam that was encouraging his congregation to abduct white girls and have them as sex slaves?
Yes. So what happened was I saw, I think it was Bedfordshire Police actually sued me in the High Court. And I was told that I would have to pay hundreds of thousands of pounds to fight in the High Court, to fight this High Court injunction, where we said, okay, look, we'll accept the High Court injunction as long as you don't ask for costs, because they were doing this deliberately. They're trying to bankrupt us. They were trying to, cause us huge financial headaches. So Bedfordshire Police, in their words, took the unprecedented step of applying to get a High Court injunction to try and curb our activities, because they were worried, because Luton, which is the Luton Police, were our kind of nemesis. We were in and out of Luton. You know, we were dealing with people like Saiful Islam, the one who punched Tommy in the face through the car. I don't know if you've seen that video from the old days. But Luton's one of the hotbeds of Islamic extremists. Now, Bedford Police didn't want us going in there and knocking on people's doors and confronting these terrorists and so on. So they applied to the High Court and said, we want to ban them from the entire town of Luton, and we want to ban them from every mosque in England and Wales for a period of 5 years. Now, to fight this, we would have had to pay something like £250,000 overall. And if we lost, we'd have to pay that plus their costs as well. So we just thought, you know what, Luton, okay, you know, it's makes us a bit sore on a matter of principle that we can't go, we're banned from an entire British town when we've done nothing wrong. But for the sake of paying £250,000, we will ignore Luton. So we agreed to the High Court injunction. I had a High Court injunction that said I couldn't go into any mosque in England and Wales. We agreed to that. So then shortly after that, I think it was like 5-6 months after that, I saw on the news, and I'm always looking at the news for these things to happen, that an imam at a mosque in Cardiff that was notorious for pumping out ISIS recruits, the imam had actually been caught on an audio recording saying that it's okay for Muslims to keep sex slaves because that's what the Prophet Muhammad did. And this blew up all across the media. So I thought, you know what? We need to go down there. We need to go down there and confront this guy. So we turned up at this mosque in Cardiff. My team went into the mosque to confront this guy. I didn't go in. I stayed outside because I had the injunction. So he wasn't there. He'd fled and he was in hiding. So that was the end of that. And then shortly after that, I was being prosecuted for something else. I think it was walking through Luton with a Christian cross. I was being prosecuted for it. And it's ridiculous. I mean, if you read my book, The Battle of Britain, you will be shocked. I can guarantee it, because I've catalogued forensically all the things they've done to us. But we were walking through Luton with Christian crosses, and the police jumped on us. We were prosecuted. They arrested me. They arrested others. And when I was on trial at Luton Magistrates, the police actually came up to me and said, "Here you go, Mr. Golding, you've been served." And it was a folder this big with paper in it. So I'm looking through it, thinking, what's all this about? And then it came to my attention that basically I was being prosecuted for contempt of court, for breaching the injunction that I just explained. And there was a folder that thick full of statements, CCTV pictures, God knows, everything. So shortly after that, I went to court, the High Court on the Strand in London. And the judge, it's funny actually, I was completely stitched up because I didn't actually face a High Court judge in the High Court, because the High Court is a civil arena. What they did was they actually brought in a criminal judge that deals with, criminal cases in the Old Bailey. So he's in the Crown Court, and they brought him across into the civil court exclusively for me, because civil judges are not really experienced in banging people up. It's mainly awarding damages and stuff like that. So they brought in a Crown Court judge specifically for my case, even though it was civil. So of course he was a lefty. He's one of these woke judges. And he just said, "Look, Mr. Golding, you flagrantly breached the injunction. I'm sentencing you to 4 weeks in prison." And immediately after that, this was the first time I've been to prison. They told me I was going to Pentonville Prison round the corner. Now, I know Pentonville Prison. It's nearly 200 years old. It's full of rats and what they called cockroaches, and it's disgusting. I don't think they've done any improvements in 200 years since the Victorian era. And I went there for 4 weeks, but thankfully I was put into complete solitary confinement. I was in my cell 24 hours a day. The only time I left my cell was to grab dinner, straight back to the cell. I was in solitary confinement for 4 weeks over Christmas, and that was my first stint in prison. But yeah, that's basically what I did. When I found out this imam had said what he said, I had to go down. I felt I had to go down there to confront him, because this is Britain. That was Wales. We can't have these Islamists saying that it's okay to the people worshipping their flock in front of them. It's okay to keep sex slaves because the Prophet Muhammad did it. This is not 7th century Arabia. This was Wales in the 21st century. So we went down there to remind him of that, and they banged me up for 4 weeks.
So during that 4 weeks, then, how does it affect you psychologically? Because, we're all thinking what we're going to have for dinner, what we're going to watch on Netflix, blah, blah, blah. All of a sudden, your life is upside down. You're in a cell, all this time on your hands. How did you process that?
It was very difficult. The first time I went to prison was a lot more difficult than the second time I went to prison. But because I've never been to prison before. And I knew that Pentonville was it's perhaps the worst gang, petty gang prison in the country. There's some that are places like Belmarsh that got terrorists and murderers and so on. But if you're talking about violent gangs, Pentonville's the worst in the country, I think. So I was dreading it when I was being taken by the prison van from the High Court to Pentonville. That was I was very anxious, very nervous, very anxious. But I had to grit my teeth and compose myself. And when I first arrived there, I went up to the processing. It was a woman that was processing me, and she went, "Don't worry, you're being put in solitary confinement." And that kind of took the weight off my shoulders a bit, because I knew if I get thrown out into general population, I'd be ripped to pieces within 5 minutes. Because they actually took me into the cafeteria straight away to get some food to take back to my new cell. That was the first thing that happened. And it was I was surrounded by Muslims and black gangs from London. That was it. That's it. That's all there was around me. So I was thinking, if I was in general population, I wouldn't last a day. I just simply wouldn't last. I'd be torn to shreds. I'd be stabbed. I'd be shanked. It wouldn't last.
Even though you're in solitary, they still sometimes have ways of getting you, like through the food, putting crushed glass and things in food. Were you apprehensive about eating the food?
No, well, actually, I was talking to Tommy Robinson about this before he got banged up. When he was in HMP only in 2018, you see, he got his food brought to him, so he couldn't trust that it hadn't been interfered with. But thankfully, twice a day I was taken out of my cell and I was taken by the prison officers to the canteen, so I could choose from like a buffet of food. I could see them getting scoops of it and putting it on the plate, then I take the plate away. So I was very thankful for that. But Tommy wasn't so fortunate. He had his food brought to him by Muslims. So there's no way I would have touched that, and there's no way he touched it. That's why he got so skinny when he came out of prison, because he'd literally been starved. So yeah, I was quite fortunate. But the thing about solitary confinement, it does mess with your head, because we're out here now. We've got our laptops, we've got our phones, we've got social media, we've got phone calls, we've got text messages, we've got WhatsApp coming through. We've got family and friends ringing us 24/7. We are quite consumed with technological stimuli all day long. When you're in solitary confinement, all that is gone, and all you've got is 4 walls and a small TV that's no bigger than a laptop screen, and it's about 10 foot away from you. And you have to, I was actually unfortunate because I had to get up to change the channel, and you only had the Freeview channels.
Wasn't that, Paul, wasn't that a relief? Wasn't that a relief to decompress from all of the insanity of modern life?
It was, but not for the first week. I would say once I got a week and a half into it, you can imagine your brain's going 1,000 miles an hour, and then after a week of solitary confinement, it's just slowly moving, slowly turning. So yeah, it does. It takes a long while to jump from hectic to completely, your mind being completely still, and it is quite a culture shock. But after 4 weeks, you're climbing the walls with boredom.
What did you do to pass? What did you do to pass the time?
Anything. Crosswords, watching TV, exercising, doing press ups, reading. I read about when I was in Pentonville, I read about 10 books. And when I was in prison the second time, I was in 2 different prisons, and I must have read about 15 books. So it's just reading. You have to keep yourself busy, but it is so boring, and it's really difficult to explain just how boring it is. It's like soul destroyingly boring. You know, the most I've ever done is 9 weeks in prison, in solitary confinement. Done 9 weeks straight. You know, Tommy's doing 9 months now. I don't think I could do 9 months. You know, that will have a massive effect on your mental health. But, you know, thankfully, I've done, the first time I was in prison, I did 4 weeks in solitary. The second time was 9 weeks in solitary confinement. But it's still rough. It's still hard.
And what books were you reading? Was it like history, politics?
Yes, history. I can't really remember the books. I remember the second time I was in prison, I remember I read a book that thick on Joseph Stalin. You know, pretty much whatever I could get my hands on.
And what was your exercise routine? Were you doing the burpees?
I was doing press ups, shadow boxing. I've been doing boxing since I was little, so I was doing a lot of shadow boxing. But even that gets boring, you know, because the boredom and the lack of technological stimuli, it just slows your brain right down to a crawl. So you just don't want to do anything. You don't want to exercise. I could understand if I was allowed to go to a gym and I was associating with other prisoners, and that would keep you kind of ticking over. But when you're in solitary, you lose the will to live. You literally just want to lay down all day. It becomes a kind of loop where boredom creates the urge to be lazy, which creates more boredom. It's very difficult to break out of.
Was there any way to communicate with your neighbours?
No. I don't think I think that what they did was there was one particular landing in Pentonville, which was for detox prisoners, you know, alcoholics and drug addicts, where they put them there to kind of dry out, like a bit of rehab. So I was put into the corner of the detox landing. So I think the cell next to me on both sides was empty. So I was in a very quiet part of the prison. But even in this quiet part of the prison, I could still hear mayhem on a daily basis. I could still hear massive fights taking place. And of course you think, oh, if this is a prison riot and they get the keys and they realise who I am, you know, it is quite nerve-wracking. I hope and pray that anyone watching this doesn't have to go to a multicultural Islamist prison in London, God forbid.
Were you able to get any visits?
Yeah, I had some visits. Yeah, had I think 2 a week, but yeah, 1 or 2 a week, I think it was. But again, the main routine for me was just getting up, having breakfast, reading, watching TV, reading, watching TV, reading, watching TV, going to bed. Well, it was just the same day after day after day after day, grinding boredom. There's only so many books you can read before it starts to become get a real irritation, you know. You read a book now and then, don't you? You don't want to shotgun read books one after the other, after the other, after the other. It really does become annoying after a while.
So in the visits then, when they brought you out, when they brought you out for a visit, were you in a visitation hall with other prisoners, or did they keep you separate somehow?
No, I was with other prisoners, but if I remember rightly, there was quite a bit of space between us and other tables, and everyone kept to themselves. The second time I went to prison in 2018, they put me into general population because it was a prison in Kent. Within 3 days, I was attacked in my cell by a bearded Islamist gang, and I sustained quite bad injuries.
Paul, you've jumped ahead. Let's go back to you getting released from this 4 weeks. We'll get to that one. You get released from this 4 weeks. You must be thinking about what you're going to do when you get out. What did you do?
I got well, actually, quite funny, actually. So I had people, I asked, obviously, I knew I was being released on a certain date, and I asked them what time. I said, look, what time am I going to be released? They said, well, probably about 9 a.m. So I had a big team of Britain First people outside waiting for me. So my door comes flying open at 6 in the morning. And they say, right, you've got to go, Mr. Golding. I was like, oh, I've got 3 hours until my friends come to pick me up, my colleagues. So they said, no, you've got to go now. And they literally just kicked me out on the street outside in North London. So you imagine there's me, the leader of Britain First, walking around North London without a phone, without a wallet, no money, nothing. I'm just walking around with a bag of clothes. Thankfully, I managed to go into a local cafe, which was owned by like Greek Cypriots. And I said to them, look, I've been kicked out of prison. I've got nothing. I've got people arriving. I know a phone number off by heart. So I got on the phone and I rang someone and I said, look, you're going to have to come as quickly as possible. They've stitched me up. They've kicked me out early. And I said, look, you know, they're coming to get me. I've got nothing. Can I have some breakfast? They allowed me to have some breakfast on tick, make a phone call. I had some nice breakfast. I was quite enjoying myself, actually, you know, at that point. I was enjoying that first taste of freedom. So I had a big English fry up. And I think it's about half an hour later, maybe 45 minutes later, I got picked up. And it's quite a strange thing. When you're in solitary confinement and you've not been looking at your phone for over a month, first thing I did was obviously get my phone. And as soon as I got my phone and looked at it, I was almost sick. The fact I was looking at a screen, you know, pressing buttons and so on, it almost made me feel sick. It was an overwhelming of stimulus from the phone. And I was almost vomiting. So that was a kind of strange side effect of being in solitary for so long. But yeah, I mean, I was released. We got straight back into activities and demos and taking on Islamists. We just got straight back into it.
So you got a few people asking then for that 4 weeks that you served. What was your actual conviction?
Contempt of court. What Tommy Robinson was imprisoned for, contempt of court.
And the basis of that was what?
It was the injunction that I explained. It was the injunction said that I couldn't go into any mosque in England or Wales because that's the legal jurisdiction, England and Wales. Can't go into any mosque or the grounds, which I carefully did not. I was outside on a public footpath. My foot soldiers, my activists went into the mosque to do the business. But nevertheless, it's all down to a judge at the end of the day. Truth doesn't matter. Fairness doesn't matter. Evidence doesn't matter. If you're on the wrong side of politics, the judge will put you down. And that's what happened. He found me guilty of contempt of court. And what he did was, they're so cheeky, they gave me a 4-week sentence, which is not really, you're not going to appeal a 4-week sentence. You're just going to put up with it, aren't you? You're not going to spend 30, 40 grand appealing a 4-week sentence. By the time it's even heard by a judge, you'll be released. So that's what they did. They didn't want me appealing it. They stitched me up, put me down for a short sentence because that's what they could get away with.
So when you got out, then you got straight back into the activism. What manner of activism was that?
Just everything, really. Anything like what I said about the mosque, you know, any kind of Islamic extremism that reared its ugly head, we were on it. Any hate preachers, any terrorists that we could get our hands on, we were confronting them. We were holding marches and protests in grooming hotspots. We held marches in Dewsbury, Birmingham, Luton. We was highly active. And of course, all of these videos of what we were doing were going straight onto Facebook and getting millions of views. And that's what kept building up our reach and our following on social media.
So what were the most memorable moments from that activism? Any close shaves?
Yes, quite a few close shaves. The closest actually was when we were locking horns with Anjem Chowdhury in late 2014. He actually played a bit of a blinder and led us into a trap, because what he did, every demonstration that he announced on social media, we were there. And every single time, you can find this footage on social media, we used to kick the police put these railings in place to keep the two groups apart. So we used to kick them over and charge at Anjem Chowdhury's protest, and we get rugby tackled by the police. We get arrested. There's so many photos and videos of me getting rugby tackled and arrested and so on, you know. But we really did want to put the pressure on them. So Anjem Chowdhury, he thought, right, we're not going to call a demonstration outside of an embassy in London. I'll tell you what we'll do. We'll call a demonstration outside London Central Mosque out after Friday prayers. So we was in a bit of a quandary then, because we thought, if he's holding a demonstration, we want to be there to confront him. But after Friday prayers outside the biggest mosque in London, the entire area is going to be filled with thousands of Muslims. So what do we do? He knows. He's kind of luring us into this trap, and it worked beautifully, to be fair. But at that point, we were so fearless, and we just didn't give a damn about the dangers that we said we're going to go anyway. So on the day of this demonstration, it's Friday. Imagine this: Friday prayers, Regent's Park Mosque. There's like thousands of Muslims inside worshipping. And there's 25 of us outside with Union Jack flags and banners. So Friday prayers finish, and thousands of Muslims all pile out of the mosque. They all leave the mosque. I mean, thousands of them, and there's 25 of us. Very, very quickly, just like that, we got surrounded. It was like Rorke's Drift. That's the only, I can't, it's like, you know, the 300 Spartans. We was just surrounded by thousands of Muslims, and there's 25 of us. But the thing is, I remember we weren't holding back. We weren't trembling in fear. If you imagine us being completely kettled in by thousands, there's a thin line of police in front of us, and they're saying to us, look, Paul, you've got to calm down, because if they rush, if they charge, we cannot hold them back. Look how many of them there are. And I said, well, what happens, Mr. Policeman? And we were shouting. We were shouting, terrorist scum off our streets and all this kind of stuff. We weren't holding back, but there was thousands of these Muslims around us, and then all of a sudden, these bottles were just raining down on us from all directions. Behind us were tower blocks, and the tower blocks were filled with Muslim residents. They were throwing stuff down at us while we were surrounded by these Muslims. And there's Anjem Chowdhury and Abu Izzadeen and his little group just in the crowd, just laughing at us. Because they said, you idiots, you walked straight into our trap. But we stood our ground. We didn't budge an inch. And in the end, the police said, look, Section 14, we're going to take you away. You've got to go, or we'll have to arrest you. I said, you could do what you want to do. But if you look at the photos, you're like, bloody hell. There must have been at least 2,000 or 3,000 of them surrounding 25 of us. And we had the tower blocks raining missiles on us from behind. And then we all got together, and I said, look, guys, we're going to try and break out of this siege, I think you can call it. And it was like Rorke's Drift. And we was like, down to our last bullet, our last ounce of strength, our last drop of bravery. And I said, right, we're going to try and get out of this. And we kind of shuffled sideways, and the police were pushing everyone back. And we just about managed after, we were literally pushing them away. It became a total chaos. And we were pushing them away, and the police were pushing them away. And we just about managed, by the skin of our teeth, to actually make our way out of this enormous crowd. That was the closest I think we came to being lynched. There was a few other times as well when we took one of our activists, when we started Operation Fightback, had a decommissioned British Army snatched Land Rover from Afghanistan. So we decided, right, what's the best thing we can do with this? Let's jump inside it where it's safe, because it's armor plated and so on. And we took it down Brick Lane, and we got out and we did our Christian patrols at the same time they were doing the Sharia patrols in East London. So we was trying to combat the Sharia trolls with our own Christian patrols. But then a few times when we went down Brick Lane, I think it was about 300 of them ended up gathering together, and the police were struggling to hold them back. And, there's so many times we came close to death, because if these crowds would have broken through the police, we would have been torn to shreds just by sheer force of numbers. So, yeah, there was a lot of times we came this close to being dispatched. But of course, someone had.
Could you just explain to someone the nature? What do you mean by Sharia patrols? What's they're like on they're policing the streets, or?
Yes, in East London. I don't think they were anywhere else, but in East London, there was Anjem Chowdhury's followers were going out onto the streets trying to enforce Sharia law, in a kind of vigilante fashion. And the videos from this went viral. It was all over the news. So we thought we'd go into the heart of Whitechapel, where they were based, and we would counteract these what they called Muslim patrols. We would counteract them by holding our own Christian patrols. So we would go into these areas with Christian crosses and Union Jacks, give out leaflets saying Christian patrol. hopefully we was trying to draw them out. Like one time we went up there, I remember one operation where the Muslim patrols were trying to, they were harassing revelers on Brick Lane and Whitechapel Road, people walking around with, a can of beer, having a good time. These Muslim patrols would surround them and say, give me that alcohol, stop being a degenerate in this area, etc. and blah, blah. So they were trying to enforce Sharia law. So one time, me and a group of activists, we were standing around outside East London Mosque with empty beer cans, trying to lure them out. We lured them out. We could confront them. We could deal with them. But yeah, so another thing we did, we went up Brick Lane with the Army Land Rover with our Christian crosses and leaflets to try and raise community. So the thing is, the Sharia patrols, they were harassing people. If you imagine young women out on a night out and they were, they had a skirt on or something like that and some high heels, they were being harassed by these Muslim patrols. But what we were doing, we were asking the community for help. We're saying, we're not here to harass you. We're not here to, to make your lives a misery. We just want your help. If you see these Muslim patrols, ring this number on the leaflet so that we can come up here and deal with them, because the police won't touch them. They're terrified of being called racist. So, we were trying to counteract these Muslim patrols. Wherever Islamic extremism reared its ugly head, Britain First was there, all guns blazing, trying to confront them, trying to counteract them.
So for many years then, we have been campaigning, exposing the grooming gangs. We had Maggie Oliver on 5 years ago, and we recently had some survivors on, Gemma, Kate. I don't know if you've seen the documentary Three Girls. We recently interviewed Amber. That was her first interview from Three Girls. So did you guys do any activism, exposing or countering the grooming gangs?
Yes, we did. Yeah. So what we did in the north of England, for example, we found out where a few of the grooming hotels, because the grooming gangs, they generally take these girls to the same hotels. So we found out where some of these hotels were, and we waited outside these hotels all bloody night, trying to wait for some, obvious grooming activity. We also went into grooming hotspots like, let me think, Rochdale. We went to Blackpool. We went to Luton. We went anywhere where there was a grooming scandal. Britain First went there. We went into kebab shops, taxi offices, taxi ranks, police stations, and we said to them, look, if you see anything like this, ring the police. If you see anything like this, ring the number on this leaflet. You get Britain First involved, we'll deal with it, we'll expose it. And to be honest, quite a lot of the local Muslim community were very positive about it, saying, yes, we'll definitely call you and all this. And I think a lot of it was sincere, these Islamist, these grooming gangs all across the north of England. We went to every single place. We went to social services in Telford and Bradford. We confronted them. We said, you are absolutely disgraceful. The way you abandoned these young girls, treated them as though they're the problem rather than the grooming gangs. We went into Telford Police Station. We went into all the police stations all across the country, even smaller towns, grooming hotspots that aren't so well known, like Aylesbury. We went to everywhere in Aylesbury with the police station, the social services, the council, the taxi offices. We went to the kebab shops, raising awareness, putting pressure, letting the grooming gangs know by word of mouth that we were in town. We did the same in Blackpool. We did the same in Rochdale, Rotherham, anywhere you name it. We were confronting grooming head on.
Good on you, man. We salute that, definitely. So what was the lead up then to your next incarceration?
So I was living I think I was living in the town of Tunbridge, just near Tunbridge Wells in Kent. And there was a big scandal in the news, the national news it was. There's a town in Kent called Ramsgate. You got Margate and Ramsgate right next to each other. Holiday hotspots, holiday towns, seaside towns. So there was a kebab shop in Ramsgate. You imagine a young English girl, 15 years old. She gets lost. She's drunk. She's been to a party. She's walking home. She gets lost. She walks into this kebab shop to ask for help, for directions. The illegal immigrants, I think one of them was from Afghanistan and so on. These migrants seized her, took her upstairs. She was 15 years old, and they gang raped her for 4 hours, taking turns. This caused a massive scandal. The men were arrested. One of them fled to Europe, and he was captured and he was brought back. They tried to evade justice. This, as you just winced then, you know, the details. The details are so horrific of this case. So we thought, right, we're gonna make their lives a misery. We're going to expose them. So the first thing we did was we used certain methods and certain skill sets to track down where they all lived. We found out where all 4 of them lived. So the first thing we did was we printed out some special leaflets, and we basically went to where they lived, and we leafleted all their neighbours with like a warning leaflet. You have a sexual predator who's on trial for gang raping a child living at number 10. Please keep an eye out for your children, and so on. You know, so it's kind of a bit like community awareness. We also went to the kebab shop and we protested outside. And then, so we did all of these activities. I thought that they were good activities. I would do the same thing in the same circumstances 1,000,000 times in a row. I thought it was justified, you know, because like, I don't know where you live. Where I live, I wouldn't like to know that there's a migrant paedophile gang rapist living 3 doors down, and you say like our children are running out, you know, up and down the road and so on. So we thought we're going to alert all the neighbours of the monster they've got in their midst. I thought that was a good thing to do, patriotic thing to do. So I think it was about 4 days later, after we came back from Ramsgate, I'm travelling through some country lanes in Kent, and all of a sudden, all these cars come from nowhere and just surround. It's like an SAS ambush. Car here, car there. We were just boxed in by these cars. All the police jumped out, and I'm like, what the hell's going on? And of course, I'm on high alert all the time for assassination attempts. You know, I take security very serious. I've had so many Osman warnings, credible death threat warnings. There's terrorists in Belmarsh right now, ISIS fanatics serving life sentences for plotting to chop my head off. You know, so I'm surrounded by all these cars, but then all the police jump out, and we all got arrested. As I was getting arrested, they were raiding my house. They took away every laptop, every screen, every computer, every iPad, every mobile phone, every SD card. They cleared my house out. They cleared our office out. They took everything. But obviously, I've got military level encryption, you know, on every device that I've got. So I was arrested. I was prosecuted for, wait till you hear this, religiously aggravated harassment.
No.
Religiously aggravated harassment. What they actually done was, I thought it's so sneaky, the powers that be. The people that gave statements weren't the rapists that were on trial for raping the underage English girl. They got the wives and girlfriends of the rapists to make statements saying that they were the ones who felt harassed. Because obviously they're not stupid. They knew that if it was the rapists making out that we were making them feel unsafe, it would be ludicrous. Yeah. So the 4 rapists, they were all convicted and sentenced to really long, laborious sentences, and they're still in prison now. So they were convicted. But the wives and the girlfriends were the ones who gave statements. So from the outside world, from what the media were reporting, it looked like we were harassing a bunch of women, which was nonsense. It was bullshit. But that's the way they spun it. And funnily enough, you wouldn't believe this, the actual prosecution, the investigation was being led. Now, just bear in mind, this is a bit of leafleting and a demo outside a kebab shop. Yeah. The prosecution was being led by SO15 Counter-Terrorism Command. And it was a counter-terrorism command officer that gave evidence against us in court. And I remember my solicitor saying to him, is this the usual thing that you get up to as an elite counter-terrorism police officer? A bit of leafleting and a protest. Is this the kind of thing that you counteract on a daily basis? It was ludicrous. But the judge was like a middle-class, look down his nose Tory type. And funnily enough, the Attorney General at the time, which is, you know, a political appointee of the Tory government, actually met with the judge on our case and got involved actually put pressure on the judge. Unheard of, absolutely unheard of for a political appointee like the Attorney General to get involved in such a prosecution that involves leafleting. You know, it's so stupid. But I was found guilty of religiously aggravated harassment. All the media was printing their headlines, anti-Muslim hate crimes, anti-Muslim hate crimes. I would do it 1,000 times over. I went to harass and confront some convicted paedophile gang rapists. I would do it 100 times over. If it kept your children safe, if it kept the children of the people watching this stream safe and in the knowledge that they've got a monster living on their road, I would do it 1,000 times over. So I went to prison knowing that, look, you've done the right thing here. Don't ever feel disheartened. You did the right thing and you're being punished for it. So obviously, you know, it burst up in the media that anti-Muslim hate crimes. What the British government did, they used this conviction for anti-Muslim hate crimes. They took that to Facebook and said, look, these are the people that you're giving a huge platform to. So I went to prison. I was taken to Elmley Prison on the Isle of Sheppey in Kent, which is I think it's a Cat A and Cat B prison. It's quite rough. Even though it's in Kent, it's still quite rough. They've got a lot of hardened criminals, lifers in there. So I was put onto the induction wing, and I spent the first 4 days in relative peace. And then I started to notice that a large group of Muslims were put on the same wing. So I just had to look over my shoulder. It was all right for a few days, but I noticed they started staring at me, and I could just tell they knew who I was, and they were hostile. And then all of a sudden, I was watching TV, and I was facing towards the right, watching my TV towards the back wall. And all of a sudden, I heard this bang, and it was my door closing, and a Muslim gang was in my cell with the door closed. And before I could even process this, before I could even think what was going on, I turned this way. The closest one just punched me straight on the nose. Now, I don't know if you've done boxing or anything before, but if you get punched on your nose, it's particularly disorientating. And I'd already gone from, you know, peaceful, complete peace, eating my lunch, just eating my lunch, watching TV, to all of a sudden being confronted by an Islamist gang. It was a lightning switch. And then I got punched on the nose. My nose, all of a sudden, it must have burst some blood vessels. It just went, whoosh, and it was Niagara Falls of blood all over me. And straight away, the gang left my cell. As soon as they saw all the blood, they left. One of them had, if I just grab this, one of them had a pen like this. I noticed that, and I thought, God, this is going to be a fight to the death. You know, this is going to be real rough. But luckily, I got one punch. I was dazed and disorientated, and they just ran out the cell. And I staggered out the cell, covered in blood, and the whole place got locked down. They got put in solitary confinement. An officer from Kent Police came to take my statement. I think it was about 3 months later, I get a call from Kent Police. This was after I'd been released. They said, we're not taking any action against them. I was like, how can you not take any action? I said, have you got CCTV? Yes, we've got CCTV. It shows them going into your cell and slamming the door and then re-emerging 10 seconds later, running. And then it shows you coming out covered in blood. But that's not enough to prosecute them. I said, what else do you want? Like, what seriously, what else do you want? But this mirrors the treatment that I've had throughout my political career. There's three main examples that I could give. First of all, I was in Luton. Like I said, I was just driving around Luton, and a car was following me. So I pulled over, and this Muslim jumped out of the car, and he's quite a stocky guy. So waddles over to my car, and he punches me in the face on video through the window. Exactly the same what happened to Tommy a bit further down the road with Saiful Islam. So I got punched in the face on video, submitted it to the police, no further action. I said, how can that be? If you got me punching a Muslim on video, would I get no further action? No, I'd get 100 years in a dungeon. So that's the first example. The second example was the one I just said. You have a Muslim gang enter my cell, my personal space, yeah, my cell. They enter, they slam the door, they run out 10 seconds later. They they're running, and I stagger out covered in blood. No further action. And then I think it was about a year or two later, we were campaigning for the local elections down in Dartmouth in Dartford. This Black Lives Matter fanatic comes out with a samurai sword. He's waving the samurai sword, threatening to chop our head off on video. It goes to trial. He gets not guilty. This is the crap we have to put up with. Like, what's going on here is a grand design, though. It's not just, these are not isolated incidents of wokeness. What's going on here is the establishment is sending a message to me, and they're saying, if you want to challenge the establishment, you're on your own. We're not going to help you. We're not going to protect you. You are on your own. And this is why Britain First has to maintain its own security department, because I know from experience the police are never going to help us. They're never going to prosecute people who attack me. There's so many examples I give. They're the main three I've just given you that I can think of right now. There's so many more.
Right. Yeah.
There's more in my book.
Hold on a second then. So you go out and leaflet to expose predators and you get convicted of that. But you get smashed in the head, guy waving a sword, punched in the head, and no further action, even though it was all caught on camera. That is absolute insanity. And it just shows, it's not like we're just railing against the system. This is your personal experience of what happened. That just shows the whole justice system's completely upside down. All right, so after they came into your cell, what was the aftermath of that like for you while you were still incarcerated? Because you must have been, really on your toes.
Well, actually, what happened was, so immediately afterwards, they were taken away. They were put down the block, the punishment block. So what happened to me was, obviously, I had a busted nose. It wasn't broken, but it was quite busted up because he punched me square on the nose, and it done some damage. And he was an Iraqi asylum seeker, believe it or not, and he'd been in prison for crimes. I can't remember what specific crimes. He got an Iraqi illegal immigrant in prison for crimes in Britain, and then attacks me, and he gets away with it completely scot-free. Gets away with a brutal attack. What they did was they moved me from the induction wing into the general population. Then they thought, we'll give him his own cell. We'll try and get him onto a main lot. And then, so I went around. It was literally around the corner, but it was on a landing, a wing where there was lots of prisoners. So the first thing that happened was quite a lot of the white English prisoners came up to me and said, "We know who you are. We've got your back. We're on your side." And that really did cheer me up quite a bit. But then the next thing that happened is one of them came down about 3 hours later and said, "I need to warn you, there's some Muslim life prisoners upstairs, and they're already plotting to do you in." And I was like, here we go again. I've literally just been attacked by an Islamist gang around the corner, and now I've got these lifers who've got nothing to lose. They're going to have a pop at me next. But I had no choice at that point, knowing what was going to happen, knowing what had just happened. I spoke to the staff about it, and I said, "Look, you ignored my warnings before, and I ended up getting attacked. Now I've got to deal with these lifers upstairs." So they locked me down. I was in my cell, and all of a sudden I looked out my window, and there's all these Muslim faces at you got a tiny little window in the prison cell door, little window like that, and there's all these Muslim faces flashing. So I've walked up there and I've said, well, they're like, "Oh, why have you hidden yourself in your cell? Why have you locked yourself away?" I said, "I can't lock myself in here. I haven't put myself in here. It's the staff that have locked me down." And they're like, you can imagine, they're giving it to me and I'm giving it back. But then what happened was I went to sleep that night, and about 5 o'clock the next morning, the door opens. Loads of the prison officers come in and say, "We're taking you somewhere else." And it's quite unnerving, being moved from cell to cell, facing this danger, that danger, this problem, threats everywhere. And this is really unsettling for anyone. They took me down to the punishment block, which is the most dirty, disgusting, most abused cells in the whole prison system. So within that prison, you've got a punishment block, and they put me into one of these cells for an entire week. I didn't have any TV. I didn't have any books. Oh, you can't imagine how boring that got. A week in a cell with minimal, and I mean minimal, entertainment of any kind whatsoever. And 7 days I did in there. And I was thinking to myself, I was the one that was attacked, and yet I'm being put in the punishment block. So after a week, they moved me to a different cell within the punishment block. It was the only one with a TV aerial. And they left me in there for 5 weeks. And to be honest, I got quite settled. It was quiet. You know, it was nice and quiet at my own cell. It was disgusting. It was filthy. It was rotten. It was horrible. But at least I just had a bed and a TV. And I just put up with it for, I think it's 4 to 5 weeks I was there. And then again, at 5 a.m, this was about 5 weeks before I was released. 5 a.m, my cell, they burst in, prison officers, you're being transferred. And again, I'm thinking, where am I being transferred to? Is it an even bigger shithole than this one I'm in now? Is it going to be even worse? So they take me out, they process me, they put me in a car, they chain me up like a slave so I can't escape. And it's just a normal car, to be honest, but I'm surrounded by 3 prison officers. And I say to them, like, well, can you tell me, please, where I'm going? Because it's making me a bit anxious and unsettled. And they said, we're taking you to HMP Liverpool. And bear in mind, I was in Kent and I live in Kent. They're saying, we're taking you all the way to Liverpool. So we had a 5 hour drive of chatting away with these prison officers. About halfway up, I think it was on the M1 or the M6, they said, we're going to stop at this services. Do you want to stay here or do you want to come in, use the toilet, grab a drink? And I said, yeah, I'd rather do that because this is excruciating. I was crossing my legs, dying for the toilet and so on. And it was perhaps all the things I've done in my long career, this was perhaps the most surreal thing that's ever happened to me, the most surreal experience that I've been subjected to. You imagine this, you're in a motorway services, there's people walking around getting a bite to eat and drinks and stuff. And then 4 prison officers walk through with a prisoner who's chained up like a slave. And they frog march him to the toilet and then frog march him back out. It was surreal. I was walking along like this with all the chains on me through a motorway service. It's so bizarre. It was so bizarre that they took me. They took
you. Yeah. Keep going.
It's an indescribable experience. You know, you'd have to be there. You'd have to experience it to appreciate it. But nevertheless, they put me back in the car. We went up to Liverpool. The prison's called Luton Prison, and it's the only prison in Liverpool. And thankfully enough, because it's so old, the prison was so old and dilapidated, they're closing it down. So it was half empty, which means there was loads of free cells everywhere. So they put me on a landing where I had like 5 empty cells that side, 5 empty cells this side. And the prison was half empty. And luckily it was filled with local, like kind of petty criminals, like Scouser petty criminals from the local area. So it was like 95% whites. I think Liverpool and Hull are the whitest prisons in the country. So no Muslim gangs, nothing like that. So I was very relieved. And I managed to have some semblance for 5 weeks of like a normal prison life, if we put it that way. But by that time, when you're in prison, you get like, I don't know, say like £15 a week to spend on snacks from what they call a canteen, but it's actually a sheet of paper where you can tick off certain snacks and then they get delivered to you and it comes off your account. So I'd like, 15 quid on my account every week. Well, a razor and shaving foam come to like 12 quid. And I didn't really want to spend all that money out of my precious £15 a week on a razor. So I ended up growing a beard like this. I looked like a Muslim convert. And so when I was in Liverpool, my beard was quite big. So no one recognised me because I had this beard. But yeah, so no one recognised me. There was no trouble. There's no grief, no issues. I actually, I had so much free space either side of me. The only time I really had my guard up was when you had to go to the shower because the showers are communal. You go into like, you know, a communal shower area, and that's always a vulnerable weak spot for any prisoner. But I went through the 5 weeks. It was just very quiet, very peaceful. And then I was released. But on the day I was released, I actually got my father to drive from Kent. So I rang him up and said, look, I'm being released in 3 days. I need you to be outside to pick me up. Of course I will, son. So on my day of my release, I'm excited. I'm going home. I'm being released. 9 weeks of solitary confinement. I've been attacked. I've been, you know, interviewed by the police. I've been moved around like musical chairs. Finally getting released. So they process me and they kick me out, and I get released. I'm walking out with my bag in my tracksuit, and then I noticed something odd as I'm walking out towards the entrance of the prison or the exit. I noticed these 3 cars on the side of the road, and as I'm walking towards them, I'd say 13 to 15 unmarked men come out, you know, not with uniforms, just men jump out of these cars. I'm thinking, what's going on here? They come over to me, 13, maybe 15 SO15 counter-terrorism command officers had intercepted me just as I was being released. My father was just round the corner, a couple of hundred yards, waiting to pick me up. And there's me. I'm surrounded by 15 officers. I said, what the hell have I done now? They said, I'm sorry, you can't go home. You're being taken to a bail hostel. What are you talking about? I've served half my sentence. Piss off and leave me alone. No, Mr. Golding, you're being detained. You're being taken to a bail hostel. You need to live in a bail hostel for the next 4 weeks. I had no choice. There's 15 of them. And these are Britain's elite counter-terrorism officers. And I've been pretty much flung in prison for leafleting, and they'd ambush me, and they're taking me to a bail hostel. Now, these bail hostels, they exist for one reason and one reason only. When you have people like murderers and armed robbers and serious criminals, they've done like 15 years in prison. When they come out, they might not have anywhere to go, and they need to climatize to life on the outside of a prison. So serious criminals get put in bail hostels so they can adjust. People who've served 9 weeks for leafleting do not get put in bail hostels. But nevertheless, there's 3 carloads of anti-terrorism police. They ambush me. My father's around the corner thinking, what the hell is going on here? The poor sod sat there for like hours on end until he went into the prison and asked them, where is my son? They said, he's been released hours ago. Well, where is he then? My father had no choice but to drive all the way back from Liverpool to Kent without me because he had no clue what was going on. So these SO15 counter-terrorism command officers drove me all the way to West London. And they put me in a bail hostel, which is kind of like, you imagine a big detached mansion house in Ealing, a really posh area of Ealing in West London. Now, Ealing, I know myself, is multicultural. It's very left-wing, very liberal and trendy. I thought this is not a great area for me to be mooching around in. They put me into this bail hostel, and it was all about extending the control over me. So they gave me strict conditions. While I was there, I couldn't have a phone that was internet enabled. I had to have one of them ancient, Nokia 3310s that I could ring people, but that's it. If I got caught accessing the internet in any way, shape or form, back in prison. And there was, inside this bail hostel, there was CCTV. I had to sign on twice a day at 12 midday and 6 p.m. So I couldn't travel too far away because I had to be back to sign in. It was all about controlling me for that little bit longer. I'd done my 9 weeks in prison. I was a free man, but they found a way to extend that control over me to neutralize me for a little bit longer. But yeah, so my time was spent. I managed to get some of my family to come up almost every day and take me out. We'd done a bit of shopping, went to lunch, and just did normal things. But I was neutralized for an extra 4 weeks. And then when my time came to an end in the bail hostel, I was finally allowed to go home. And I went back before you get sent to prison, which you think might be a long time. I was renting a house, but I thought I can't really be paying the rent while I'm in prison. So I got rid of the house. I had no home. I got rid of it all. I got rid of all my responsibilities because I thought I might be in prison for a long time here. So I got rid of everything. So when I was released from the bail hostel, I went back to my mum's for a bit, so I got back on my feet. I was back at my mother's for 2 days, and I started going back to my boxing gym in Southeast London. And while I was at my boxing gym, my mother's ringing me frantically ringing me. And obviously, once I finished, I'm like, what's going on? Why are you ringing me 20 times? The police are here looking for you. The police have been looking for you. They want to arrest you again. What have I done this time? My probation officer, literally 2 days I was out, 2 bloody days. And the police tried to rearrest me on some trumped up stuff that I was planning on travelling to Northern Ireland for the 12th of July celebrations. Well, if I wanted to travel to Northern Ireland, what the hell's it got to do with you lot? But it was just about control, grinding me down and disrupting my activities. It didn't stop me though, because eventually the probation finished, and eventually they realized they couldn't do anything. You know, they locked me up in all these different processes. I had a post-sentence supervision order, which meant that I had to, if I wasn't sleeping at my mother's house, I had to let the police know where I was going and where I was sleeping. It was just layer upon layer upon layer of control and regulation and all these different conditions. They just kept trying to trip me up. They even re-prosecuted me to try and put me back in prison for 2 weeks. But the judges, to their credit, and these are magistrates who are usually, you know, bent as a 9-bob note, they're very politically biased magistrates because they're the lowest rung of the legal ladder. They're just cowboys at that level. So the probation actually prosecuted me again to try and put me back in for 14 days. But the magistrates took a look at the evidence and said, this guy's done nothing wrong, and they threw it out. My probation officer actually said to me, look, I've got superiors who are telling me what to do. I knew this was going nowhere. This is nonsense. But eventually I managed to, you know, get out of their clutches and remove myself from their tentacles. And I managed to rebuild Britain first. Facebook had been taken down because I forgot to say, while I was in prison in Elmley, before I was attacked, I was watching normal, because you only get normal TV in a prison. So I was watching anything you can to keep you sane. I was watching Prime Minister's Questions. I think it was Theresa May was the Prime Minister at the time. But I'm watching, you can imagine my shock. I'm watching this, you know, Prime Minister's Questions, eating my lunch. And all of a sudden, a Labour MP jumped up. So I'm only paying half attention. A Labour MP jumped up. Will the House join me in congratulating Facebook on suspending the hateful accounts of the far-right group Britain First? And also, I've spat all my food out everywhere. And I'm, what? And I'm in a blind panic. I'm like, wait, because it's a difficult feeling to explain. But you spend years of hard work building up a huge social media following. We had more followers on our Facebook than all the other political parties combined at Westminster. We had a huge organic following, the biggest social media following of the far right that's ever been assembled. And I'm in the prison cell and I'm watching it on TV, and all the MPs start bursting out with applause, saying, yes, they've taken it down. Britain First has been suspended. But yeah, that was a difficult pill to swallow, considering, you know, I thought, when we get out of prison, what are we going to do? Because that was our main platform. That was our main outlet to the outside world. And it was huge. We were reaching like 10, 15 million people a week with our Facebook page, and it was all gone just like that.
So did the way they treat you increase your resolve to keep going with the activism?
Of course, yes. People like me have got a bit of a screw loose, I would imagine. We're not built like other people. So yeah, I can only speak for myself, but I thrive on this sort of thing because it confirms to me, you know, I ask myself the question, if you were irrelevant, if what you were doing was not effective, then quite frankly, they'd leave you alone. They'd ignore you. But you know, you must be making an impact because they're terrorizing you. You know, I've been arrested. I keep count of these sort of things. I've been arrested over 20 times in my political career. I've been prosecuted over 10 times. I've been to court 33 times. And I've been in 3 different prisons. And there's terrorists in prison serving life sentences for plotting to chop my head off. I've had lots and lots of death threat warnings from the police. So yeah, they've absolutely subjected me to most horrendous persecution over decades to try and silence me and shut me up. But that just that confirms to me, all I can deduce from that is that, well, you're obviously doing something right. You're obviously pushing the right buttons, because otherwise they'd ignore you. They wouldn't bother with you.
So
if they see
what
you
year
as a
did you
threat,
get? What year did you get released?
2018.
And,
I was sent to
have you
prison
been?
in.
And the only social media platform that's allowed you to go back on is X.
Yes. So what we were operating for a long time with, you know, like sock puppet accounts on a lot of social media. So we'd create an account in the name of, you know, Sean Atwood, and we'd just start accumulating friends and so on, start posting Britain First videos, but then it would get closed down. So we'd do it again. So we were doing, like, you know, vigilante renegade kind of stuff for a while on social media. And then, of course, Elon Musk purchased X, and the rest is history. Eventually, we were allowed back on. I think we've got about 500,000 followers. My account, Britain First and Ashley Simons, over 500,000 followers. The problem we have with X, though, it's nowhere near as effective as Facebook in a British context, because the vast majority of people who are on X are American. There's hardly any British people on it, to be fair, outside of the political kind of circles in Britain. So I've asked my mother, my father, my aunties, uncles, friends. None of them are on X. They're all on Facebook. Unfortunately, Facebook is continually banning us. See, when Trump was elected, Zuckerberg actually came out and made a big speech about talk about free speech and free expression. Everything's changed now. Facebook is going to be just like X. Okay, we'll put that to the test. We opened up a fan page. It got 20,000 followers very quickly, suspended. So we opened up another one. It got like 3,000 followers, suspended. So yeah, it's just Zuckerberg is still a globalist toad who's censoring everyone. But the problem with X is, you know, you can only reach so many people in Britain. And like I use the adverts platform on X to actually analyze people's accounts. So because, you know, you can do targeting with your adverts. So if I want to target all of Tommy Robinson's followers who live in the United Kingdom, it tells me how many there are. And it's quite shocking. You know, 80% of Tommy's account is American, 80%. Same with mine, same with Ashley, same with Britain First, everyone's. It's 80% American. And then you look at the British contingent and you notice that the vast majority of them are left wing. And that's a hangover from the old days when everyone who was right wing used to get censored and they used to go elsewhere. So the British population on X is still a lot of Muslims, but overwhelmingly left wing. So it's quite sad, really, but it's the only platform we have, but it's not really effective in reaching the British masses. We need to get onto Facebook. That's where the British people, in the majority, have their social media interactions.
So how does Britain First function now?
Well, it was actually yesterday we surpassed 21,000 paid up members, which if you take, because I don't believe Reform are a right-wing patriotic, or, you know, I don't believe that they're the solution to the problems we have in this country. I believe they're controlled opposition. Nigel Farage has said that if we confront Islam, we'll lose. He's not interested. He said he won't commit to mass deportations. He said he's not concerned, direct quote, not concerned that white British people could become a minority in the future. He's appointed a completely unknown Muslim as the chairman of his party just because he's a multimillionaire. In the last few days, we've seen some of these Bangladeshi Muslim groups all out campaigning for reform. So, and they're welcoming defectors from the Liberal Democrats and Labour, left-wing councillors, left-wings and so on. So Reform is not a patriotic or nationalist political party. They're not on our side of the fence. You know, they do make some noise about we're going to stop the boats, we're going to bring down the numbers of immigration, but we've heard all that nonsense from the Tories before. And Tory types never deliver. So I think that if you subtract Reform from the equation, Britain First is light years ahead of any other whatever you want to say, right-wing, patriotic or nationalist political party in the country. In fact, I can confidently say, because I know I get fed a lot of information, of course, that every other political party on the right of politics is way below 1,000 members, and yet we've got 21,000 members. And Britain First is a household name. We have public recognition. It's faded a bit in recent years, admittedly, because we've lost that Facebook. We've lost that massive reach that we used to have, but we're still well known. And if you look at our videos, when we're up on bridges or driving our battle bus through a town centre or a high street, if you look at when we're on roundabouts with the placards, the support is overwhelming for Britain First. I'm sitting here now, if you compare us to other right-wing parties, you see behind me, I'm in our London office. We have a 2-story building in Manchester, which is our national headquarters. We have 2 purpose-built, customised battle buses with huge PA systems and retractable banners. No other party has this kind of infrastructure on the right of politics. If you subtract Reform, which are just, I believe they're just Tories 2.0, and they're being pushed relentlessly by the mass media. It was only 2 days ago they had a huge 2-page spread in the Sun. Could you imagine Britain First getting a 2-page spread in the Sun? It would cause mayhem. It would just never happen in a million years, because we are genuinely anti-establishment, whereas Reform, I believe they're just an establishment safety valve. The establishment knows that there's millions of angry voters out there, the silent majority. Those angry votes need to be neutralised. So let's roll out Nigel Farage. They'll all vote for him, and he's not a threat. So those angry votes are neutralised. So yes, we are by far, by any metric you care to mention, we are by far the largest, strongest, with the biggest resources, the best infrastructure of any right-wing political party.
Yeah, and Reform voted against investigating the grooming gangs, which was really sickened me. So what do you hope to achieve from here, Paul?
Well, if I go back to recent years, see, we fought the Electoral Commission in court for 4 years. We spent like £50,000 fighting them in the High Court to try and be registered as a political party, because they kept blocking us. We would apply to be a political party, they would reject it. And again, and again, and again, on the flimsiest of reasons. In the end, we were forced to take legal action. We took them all the way to the High Court, and they were forced to register us. So I think it was 2022, we were registered as a political party. And from there, we started to contest local council elections. We're not daft. We're not going to pretend we're on the same scale as the mainstream, the old gang parties. We're not going to fight general elections. We're going to start small and local. So we started fighting council elections. And we've got some really impressive results. I mean, we've, in various different seats, to various different local elections, we've beaten the Tories, we've beaten Labour, the Liberal Democrats, the Greens, UKIP, we've beaten Reform. We've beaten practically every major party in this country at local level. The only time we've done well in a parliamentary by-election was in Tamworth, when we beat the Liberal Democrats, we beat the Greens, we beat UKIP, we beat so many parties, and we came just behind Reform. And I think that freaked the establishment out a bit, because you had Labour, Tories, Reform, Britain First, and then the Liberal Democrats, the Greens, and so on. So I think that really freaked them out. So all of a sudden, I noticed that the media started blitzing everyone with Reform propaganda, just like that. And it just Reform, Reform, Reform. And then Nigel Farage came back out of retirement, and the media are just promoting them. I mean, could you imagine Britain First being invited on Question Time every second week? Could you imagine could you imagine the Paul Golding show on GB News? It wouldn't happen, because we are genuinely anti-establishment. But these people like Nigel Farage and Richard Tyson, Lee Anderson, they're given a massive media platform, because the establishment are trying to do 2 things. They want to split the Tory vote forever to keep Labour in, and they want to neutralise all the angry patriotic votes in this country by giving them a safety valve to vote for. So vote, if you're angry about immigration, vote for these guys. And then people go and vote for them, not knowing any better. And that's millions of votes neutralised. But Reform are not going to salvage this country. In fact, if they were genuinely a threat to the establishment, they would be demonized, they would be persecuted, they would face lawfare, they would be censored, they would be shunned by the mainstream media, but they're suffering none of that, none of it at all.
Yeah, it's just an illusion of choice, isn't it? So
Exactly.
you took us on a phenomenal description of your journey, especially the prison stuff. You know, we've had a lot of prison stories on this channel, but to hear what you went through, man, that was quite gripping, and I felt for you. You've had quite a few questions coming from the viewers as well. Do you have time to just stay on and answer some questions?
Of course, yeah, absolutely.
All right, let me go for it then. Let's see. So, how can we make change? Use your vote instead of abstaining and letting the politically active newcomers make all the decisions. That's from Open News Now. How can we make change is the question.
You see, it's not something that we can directly influence. Now, I've been looking at political trends, elections, patterns for 25 years, and that gives you a huge amount of experience. It's not something that we can influence, unfortunately. What the reason the tide is turning in this country, and the reason that the vast majority of people are thinking like us now, is because of the deteriorating situation in the country. So it's a bit of a perverse logic, and people sometimes call me an accelerationist because in a perverse sort of way, I want things to get really bad really quickly so that the silent majority is forced off their backside. They're forced to take action. Until that happens, the best we can hope for is to build the foundations of a true, uncompromising, patriotic mass movements. Just build those foundations so that in the future, when things get so bad in this country, people will be forced to take action. And that's what Britain First is doing right now. We're just slowly building. We're building our donor base, our membership base, our activist base, and we're just staying active. We're holding our public marches. We're turning up at migrant hotels. We're doing all the things that you need to do to keep going. But until things deteriorate in this country, then the silent majority will remain silent, but eventually they'll be forced to take action. And that's when real change will come.
You're getting asked, would love to hear Paul's take on the Homeland Party self-imploding.
A bit of a controversial one, this one. You can imagine in 25 years just how many of these micro groups have popped up and then disappeared a few years later. It could easily be in the hundreds, and I've seen them come and go. People come and go. The people who stick around for decades are the ones you need to back. It's not just me. Tommy Robinson's been around for over 15 years. Tommy Robinson's been persecuted. But if you see all these micro groups popping up and then disintegrating, and that's all we're seeing with this Homeland group. Now, as you probably all know, a few weeks ago, I exposed the fact that the leader of Homeland has a big swastika tattoo on his chest, and yet they were pretending to be a kind of moderate, mainstream, sensible nationalist, but they're not. I showed evidence that these are, full-on fascists and Nazis, and they were taking everyone for a ride. And then some very peculiar things happened, and Hope Not Hate got involved, and that demonstrated to me, with my experience, that Hope Not Hate are something to do with this Homeland group. I believe it's like a far-right data harvesting operation. So if you're on like one of those types, these online Nazi trolls, and you join Homeland, Kenny Smith will give your details to Hope Not Hate. And I said all this weeks ago, and I said to Ashley at the time, this outfit won't last long, maybe 6 months. And it's been literally 3 weeks and they're already imploding. So I've seen it happen hundreds of times. Britain First has been around for 14 years. We've suffered horrendous persecution, horrendous setbacks, and we're still going strong. We're not just surviving, we're thriving. And we are by far the biggest patriotic party in this country. So my advice, if people want unity, if people want to see a mass movement of patriots, then there's no point wasting your time with a micro group. You might as well get involved in the biggest and the strongest, which is Britain First. And I'm biased and I'm blowing the trumpet of Britain First, but the facts speak for themselves. If you look at the Electoral Commission annual accounts, you can see we're by far the largest and strongest patriotic political party in this country. It's indisputable.
Wasn't there a situation where a homeless veteran was speaking out against you?
Yes, but we released information where he admitted himself that he'd been meeting with Hope Not Hate. So, you know,
could you elaborate on how they carry out those operations to discredit you? What's the mechanics of it?
This is see, Hope Not Hate is a left-wing dirty tricks machine. So let's just pretend you, Sean, you join Britain First, you rise, you become part of the leadership team, you spend a year with me overhearing my phone calls and so on, and then you get offered £20,000 to make up a load of crap about me and Britain First. And people assume because you had a close vicinity to me for an extended period of time that there might be some truth in these claims. But the fact of the matter is, behind the scenes, Hope Not Hate have paid you money to spew all sorts of nonsense. They've done this. Tommy Robinson actually produced a brilliant expose on Hope Not Hate, and everyone has to watch that because he meticulously details example after example after example of how Hope Not Hate subvert and character assassinate everyone they possibly can on the right of politics. And it's all based on lies and dirty tricks.
So it's an interesting question because my grandfather got left for dead in Tunisia fighting the Nazis, and the Americans rescued him. So this person's Scottish lad wants to know why he's getting called a Nazi for defending the qualities his ancestors fought the Nazis for.
Yes. If you look at people like Bernard Montgomery or Winston Churchill, their views were what would be considered today to be extreme right wing. They'd be very similar to Britain First or anyone else you care to mention. You know, they weren't liberals or wokeists or whatever you want to call them. But nevertheless, they still fought the Nazis. Now, my own family fought the Nazis in the Second World War. My great grandfather, Edward Golding, was in the Royal Artillery. He was a sergeant in the Royal Artillery. He was captured. He was left behind and captured at the Battle of Dunkirk in 1940. He spent the rest of the war in a Stalag prisoner of war camp in Poland. So my own family had fought the Nazis. So the reason they call us racist, fascist, Nazi is because it's how they maintain their control over the situation. And so these are bogey words that have lost all meaning. Because if you even just like question mass immigration, you're a Nazi, you're a fascist, you're a racist. You can express any kind of political opinion, you will get. They won't debate you. They won't argue the nuances of your position. What they will do, though, is slander you. They will demonize you. They will hurl all these bogey words at you to try and shut you up and silence you. And of course, you know, the words like Nazi and fascist, they've got connotations. So if I called Sean a Nazi, people would immediately, like subconsciously, think of Hitler, Second World War. They'd think of the Holocaust. So they're trying to artificially connect you with all of these terrible things in order to neutralize you politically. It's a system of control, Orwellian mind control, and that's why they do it. That's what all these words mean. They've lost all meaning in the modern age. You know, I've seen some articles on the news that dogs are racist and stuff like this. You know, it's so ridiculous these days. But the moment that the British people get past the point of caring about being called racist or anything else, and they just stick to their guns, that's the moment when things will change in this country. And we're getting close to it because things are getting so bad. And do you know what the great promise of salvation of this country is going to be? The fact that we've got Labour in charge, because they're going to spend the next 5 years, and then I truly believe, because Reform are going to split the Tory vote, which means Labour will get back in, they'll spend 10 years wrecking this country beyond all recognition. And that will force the silent majority off their backsides to take political action. They'll finally get out and start voting again.
Right. Here's a super chat. I'll just read this. Thank you, Luke. Paul is a real G, never compromised like that swindler Farage or that lard ass Kenny. Then you got a question from Joe. Does Paul recognize neoliberalism following a US policy of never-ending wars, capitalism, and underfunding from the government has created problems and pressure on the public.
It's quite a lot to unpack there. I'm against it's kind of come to an end these days, but the previous US like neocon policies of endless wars and interventions everywhere, I'm totally against that. I believe the West should be first and foremost looking out for themselves, other Western nations. I wouldn't want the British military deployed unless it was defending our brother and sister nations like Canada, Australia, New Zealand, where the people are British, or even intervening in South Africa to help the white minority there. Millions of them are British. So we seem to interfere everywhere except where it's truly needed. I am a great supporter of capitalism. I do believe, state control and socialism, the government interfering and controlling all aspects of society is a terrible thing. It's not a British tradition. We have a British tradition of freedom and individual liberty and democracy and due process. And socialism, wherever it's been tried, has always failed. It's always led to tyranny. It's always led to the suspension of human rights and freedom of expression, free speech. And you've got to admit, the West is kind of lurching towards socialism in a big way over the recent years. And that's a big problem because we've seen it with censorship. We've seen it with immense government spending and over taxation of the population. So we are heading slowly but surely in the West towards socialism, and it won't be pretty. It'll end in tears. So if you want to talk about Britain first ideologically, I would say that we're nationalists because we believe in the nation state. We believe in the British nation state, and we want to preserve that. We want to preserve not only our culture, traditions, but also our ethnicity as the majority, the demographic majority in the United Kingdom, within the British Isles. If we have minorities, they've got to remain minorities. There can't be open borders, mass immigration. We do support capitalism. It's the only thing that has made the West truly great is capitalism, and the fact we have free enterprise. It's made us the first world. And socialism, whether it's communist, socialist, Marxist, liberal, it's always ended in failure. A big state, a big government controlling all aspects of society has always ended in tyranny. It's always ended in failure. And quite frankly, you just got to look at people like Jeremy Corbyn to see where it would lead. You look at socialists like Jeremy Corbyn.
Yeah, I think you've got a good point there, Joe. I mean, ever since Blair and Bush told the world that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction, and then all their cronies made billions just bombing the crap out of some of the poorest countries in the world. And then they entice the locals, they destroy the countries, entice the locals to come over here so they can use them as slave labor. And they make even more billions off the back of that. And then F the public, they don't care about the fallout. We just got to deal with it. Won't even investigate the grooming gangs. It's absolutely obscene. And the public here is sick of it. All right, so what do you know about Starmer signing us up to Euro Defence Forces on 19th of May? That's Shah is asking that question.
I do apologise, Shah. I'll have to look into that. I'm not too clued up on that. But I'm personally opposed to any kind of European Defence Force. It's Britain First policy to withdraw from NATO because it's an obsolete alliance which only benefits certain countries in Europe. For example, where was NATO when the Falklands were invaded? NATO was nowhere to be seen. Britain needs to focus on Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. They're nations that are populated with British people that have the British way of life, and they're the countries we need to rebuild. The Commonwealth, the dominions. We need to rebuild the British Empire, but not obviously in its previous format. But the British population is not just in the United Kingdom. It's in Canada, it's in Australia, it's in New Zealand, and some in South Africa as well. They're the areas we need to be focusing on. And of course, the Commonwealth is an untapped resource. The Commonwealth has 2.6 billion people. That should be our trade area. That should be the area where we prosper and grow. The Commonwealth. We've got so much potential at our fingertips, but we just blow it all up the wall to be part of a socialist European superstate. It's absurd.
You best be careful what you say with this next question because you don't want to reveal your movements because of all these threats on your life. Tony is asking whether you go to church.
I do go to church, but not as often as I would like, because I do have to keep my head down. I can't go to the same church over and over and over again in case someone realizes, and it gets out. In fact, I went to a church in Salford, and 2 weeks later it was on the Hope Not Hate website. So I have to be careful. I'd like to go to church a lot more, but I am a God-fearing Christian, Protestant, and I'm very proud to lead what I consider to be the only genuine Christian nationalist political party in the United Kingdom.
Will you be approaching Steve Laws following his resignation from the Homeland Party?
The short answer to that is definitely not. It was only a few months ago that Steve Laws posted up a picture of Oswald Mosley and said, this is the alternative. Steve Laws is openly fascist, and we're not interested in any of that. We are British nationalists who love Britain, and anything to do with Nazism or fascism is simply not welcome in Britain first.
So Trevor wants to know, is Britain first pro-European, as in the rejoining the European Union?
Absolutely not. We believe that Britain, an ancient, powerful nation state with a rich culture, history and heritage, should be an independent and sovereign nation state, and we make our own laws, we decide our own affairs. Anything less than that is a betrayal of the millions of our forefathers that died in world wars to defend this country.
Why would any leader let an enemy culture mass flow into the country? Because they make money off every turn, hundreds of millions in contracts for Serco, housing.
Yeah.
They get in the prisons. It's £60,000 a year to house them in the prisons. They use them as slave. Every angle on this, they're making money off it, the globalists.
Absolutely. But it's even more than that. It's ideological as well. You see, after the horrors of the Second World War, the kind of the what we call the political left kind of took over Western society, and they've kind of brainwashed us into this idea that all white people are bad because of what Hitler and the Nazis did, even though we fought Hitler and the Nazis, even though, like, the Russians suffered millions of casualties fighting the Nazis, and they're white Europeans. But you can see what's happened. The horrors of the Second World War has convinced our political elite that we need to become multicultural in order to, walk into a peaceful and a harmonious future. And they're committed to that ideologically. And obviously, ordinary people who live in multicultural cities and towns can see that's just bonkers. The idea that Britain is going to settle down into this harmonious, beautiful, utopian melting pot. But this is the ideology, this left-wing ideology that motivates and has captured our entire political elite, the media, the education system, all the professors, the universities, the trade unions. They all are completely wedded to this idea that we must become multicultural, and white people left on their own are bad. And it's ideological. And that's the way most of these people think.
So Victoria says, love to you, brother. Is there anything that the authorities could throw at you to sway you from your mission?
I don't think so. I don't think there's anything that they could do apart from putting me in prison for the rest of my life, or engineering a successful assassination attempt. I don't think there's anything they can do to stop me, because, like I say, I've been going strong now for 25 years. I've been through horrendous, dangerous experiences over that 25 years, and it hasn't stopped me. So I don't think they can stop me. But like I said, the danger is real. People don't really appreciate this. There's ISIS terrorists in Belmarsh prison right now, as you're listening to me talk, who are serving life sentences for planning and plotting to chop my head off. That's the threat that when you're at this level, that's the threat you face. But like I say, it's never slowed me down. It's never stopped. It's never stopped me in my tracks. I'm not going to bow down. I'm not going to be intimidated, because I am an Englishman, and I will fight for my beloved country until my dying breath, until my last drop of blood. Nothing's going to stop me.
So Mark wants to know, does Paul think things have gone past the point of no return in the UK?
This is actually a common observation from a lot of people. The answer is no. There's still 55 million of us in this country. We're nowhere near the point of no return. It is true to say that the further we go down this road, the harder it becomes to turn it round. But I've said for decades now, look, establishment policies are going to lead us probably to the point of a civil war. No one wants it, but this is probably where it's going to lead, because you can't dispossess a native people in their own land without expecting them to fight for their own existence, their own survival. And it will happen eventually, I believe. And the only way we can stop that is with a political fight back, which is what Britain First is doing, which is what we're trying to organise, a political response to what's going on. But like I say, we're not past the point of no return. In 15 years' time, we are going to become a minority in England. In 25 years' time, we're going to become a minority across the whole of the United Kingdom. So we have 25 years in order to stop mass immigration. And if we can stop it at any point within that 25 years, then we can just about hang on. And it will be. But the thing is, like, this is not going to be reversed overnight. People need to get in the frame of mind where this is going to take decades of non-stop political effort to turn this round. You know, it's taken decades to get us to this point now. From the other side, you know, they didn't just flood our country with immigrants overnight. It took 80 years. So it's going to take decades to turn the situation around. But what alternative do we have except to lose our country and disappear from the face of the earth? We have no choice but to mount a political fight back.
Which ties into the next question. How can we make change without obtaining some power?
Like I said, I initially joined the old British National Party, and they were very successful. They gained over 55 councillors around the country, 2 seats in the European Parliament, 1 seat on the Greater London Assembly. We can see, even though UKIP and Reform are kind of safety valve parties, they're not genuine patriotic alternatives. They are safety valve parties. They are establishment controlled opposition. But you can see people don't understand that. The masses out there are still voting for them, thinking that they're a patriotic alternative. So you can look at them. You can look at Reform and UKIP, the old UKIP, and look see the success that they had and think it can be done. And with every day, with every year that goes past, things get worse and more people are becoming radicalized and waking up. So the political possibilities of the future are going to be a lot more fertile than they are at this point right now. So I'm very optimistic for the future. You know, I'm not scaremongering. I'm not a doom merchant. I actually think we have a real chance to take this country back over the next 20 years. It's going to be rough. It's going to be horrific for people like me who bear the brunt of all the persecution and so on. But, you know, what alternative do we have? Our children and grandchildren, future generations will be doomed if we don't take action now. And that's what we're doing.
Trevor wants to know, what will Britain First be doing for expats to return to the UK?
I'm not sure how to answer that, to be honest. There's obviously a lot of expats in Spain. But remember, British people who go to live in Australia and Canada and New Zealand are still within the orbit of the British family, so to speak. I think that as things get worse in this country and people realise that if you go to Australia, it's getting just as bad out there. It's getting just as bad in Canada. You can't escape. There's no escape for people. You can't run away from this. It's going to catch you up at some point. And, sooner or later, you're going to have to do something. The longer you leave it, the more difficult it will be. Sooner or later, people realise that. And like I say, when things deteriorate to a certain point in this country, they will be forced to take action. Because, you see, politics is downstream from social economic factors. And it's always been that case. At the moment, yes, we're being invaded by mass immigration. There's an illegal immigration crisis. Everywhere you look, there's bad news and treachery and corruption. But people have still got jobs. People can still feed their families. People can still go on holidays. People can still get a car on finance. Until we have the situation impacting on people personally, then people have the luxury of ignoring politics. Sooner or later, it's going to get so bad they can't ignore it any longer, and that's the moment we're waiting for.
So this looks like a horrific story. Do you know about the young girl, Charlene Downs? And this person is alleging that she was disposed of in kebab meat and fed to the locals.
Yeah, she wasn't. It's not alleged in this case. She was. The police have said publicly and in court that she was disposed of in kebab meat.
Oh my God.
Britain First actually led the campaign in Blackpool for Charlene Downs. We've held so many days of action. We've had a protest outside Blackpool police station. We've spoke to the chief inspector of Blackpool Police. I'm in contact a lot of the time with Charlene Downs' mother, Karen Downs. She comes out with us campaigning. She's spoken at our big meetings, our conferences. At the moment, I'm hoping that there's going to be some sort of breakthrough soon. They're reinvestigating some new evidence. They've got some new detectives on the case. Hopefully, we can get justice for poor Charlene. She was the victim of a grooming gang in Blackpool. They murdered her, and then they diced her body up into kebab meat. It's a truly horrific case. But Britain First has already been up there campaigning with the family on this issue. So we've already been up in Blackpool.
Good grief, I'm speechless now. So you're getting asked about the police not standing up for the patriots. Do you think there's some good cops and it's just, these orders come down from the top and they're kind of like the hands are tied?
I think it's a mixture. I don't think it's like it's clear cut as saying, the bobbies on the beat are good and the hierarchy's bad. I think from my experience, it's a kind of mixed bag. You get some police pull me over in the battle bus harassing me, and they're just, quite frankly, they're just arseholes. They're like, they've got a chip on their shoulder, want to be RoboCops, jobs worths, so many of them. But some are really nice, some are reasonable, some are good. But like you say, the problem is the higher ups take their orders from the Home Office. The Home Office is politically controlled at the moment. It's politically controlled by the Labour Party, and they take their orders and they don't question their orders. That's the problem. Until we get police officers saying, "Do you know what? I'm not going to do that. I'm just not going to do it. You can do what you want, but I'm not taking part in this. This is not good police work. This is tyranny. I'm stepping back. I'm resigning." Until you get to that point, you're going to have the Jobsworths enforcing the tyranny across the country.
Look, Paul, we're at 2 hours. You've been extremely generous with your time. This has been absolutely fascinating for you to share your journey. I was on the edge of my seats for some moments there when you were describing certain things, especially in the prison. And for viewers watching then, if you want to reach out to Paul, follow Paul, support him. He's banned from everywhere, so all he's got left is his X link. This is the least links in the description box below video I've ever seen from a guest. So his X link is down there. And you mentioned also that you have a book.
Yes, I've got 2 books actually. I've just released a new book on Islam, which dissects the entire religion. And I've also wrote a book in 2019, which covers my life from 2019, from the start of my political career to 2019. And it's called The Battle for Britain. You can obtain both of the books, and I sign every copy that's ordered. On the Britain, you go to Google, type in Britain First, go on the Britain First website. You can order both of those books. But The Battle for Britain is my kind of autobiography. And I wanted to write that specifically because I wanted to catalogue forensically all of the persecution, all of the arrests. What we spoke about on this podcast is just scratching the surface. If you buy the book, you can read all the detail, all the experience, the whole thing in detail.
Is there anything else you'd like to say to the viewers in conclusion, or anything I've left out?
Britain First has a march for remigration in Birmingham on the 17th, Saturday the 17th of May. Our first march for remigration in Nuneaton was a great success. We had a huge crowd of patriots turn up. So hopefully, if you can get to Birmingham on that day, on Saturday the 17th of May, come and join us. We're going to be holding a big rally with a huge screen, huge stage, thousands of flags, international speakers list. If you can make it, come along. And thank you to everyone for your questions. And thank you to you, Sean, for inviting me on.
Thank you for coming on, my friend. I'm going to let you go and close the show. And good luck with what you're doing.
Yeah, God bless.
All right, take care. Good night. Cheers. Well, fascinating guest, folks. And thank you for all your questions. Really did help steer the conversation at the end. Covered a lot of topics in the, primarily we've been a prison channel from back when we started in 2007. And that was prison and then some, wasn't it? So much. And so relevant to what's happening today, and tying that into all the campaigning and the work we've been doing about the grooming gangs. Unbelievable that Paul ends up handing out leaflets to try and expose these monsters, and then goes to prison for it. Yeah, the monsters ended up in prison as well, but it's the whole thing is upside down. And then he gets attacked time and time again, and the cops don't do a single thing about it. So a patriot can hand out leaflets, get put away, but get smashed in the face, and the cops aren't going to do a single thing about it. And that's from his own mouth, his own story. We're not just, railing against the system. This is what he has lived, folks. So yeah, absolutely fascinating. So we will be getting more people on that are in the genre of politics. We had Graham Moore on the other night, the constitutionalist. Everyone was fascinated by him. And just to let you guys know what's coming up tomorrow. So we've got a former spy of Harvey Weinstein coming on at 4 p.m. And he's dropping bombshells about Rose McGowan. He's got recordings. He's got emails. His name is Seth Friedman. Harvey Weinstein went to Black Cube to help him to get to spy on people. And with the Harvey Weinstein trial happening, this is really relevant right now. And I had to run all this by my lawyer as well, just to see if we could even go to with Seth. But he has approved it. So that's coming on at 4 p.m. tomorrow. And then we have got a survivor coming on at 9 p.m. who's never come on before. That'll be the 9 p.m. podcast. And then Ron, hopefully he'll be back tomorrow. He's been lollygagging with his birthday celebrations, but he's got an ex-elite law enforcement officer coming on, Rafa, and he will be interviewing him live. So tons more content coming tomorrow, folks. And I'm going to go to bed now, leave everyone to it. So thank you for tuning in. Much love and respect wherever you are in the world. And hope to see some of you guys in the chat tomorrow.